everyone for being here tonight for We Speaks with Dr. Jean Clinton. We're so excited to have you all here. Before we invite the lovely and beautiful and talented and brilliant Dr. Jean up with us, a few things for all of you joining us by Facebook or Skype. You can Skype in or Facebook your questions directly online, and we'll be doing Q&A at the very end. So it'll be a 25 to 30-minute keynote followed by Q&A, so start thinking about questions that you might want to ask at the end of this. So without further ado, I am going to let a video introduce our tonight's guest.
Dr. Jean Clinton is a clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at McMaster University. Dr. Clinton is renowned nationally and internationally as an advocate for children's issues. Her special interest lies in brain development and the crucial role relationships and connectedness play therein. Dr. Clinton champions the development of a national comprehensive child well-being strategy, including a system of early learning and care for all young children and their families. She is equally committed to ensuring that children's and youth's needs and voices are heard and respected. Please help us in welcoming our friend, Dr. Jean Clinton.
Great, hi. Hi, and thank you. Thanks very much. Isn't that a fantastic intro? I love it. I want a copy of it. So I'm really thrilled to be here. A little anxious. I'm not used to not having my usual thing here and my slides and my crutches. So this is going to be very spontaneous. I am, as you've heard, a child psychiatrist, but I've spent a lot of my time trying to figure out how can I be more upstream. As a child psychiatrist, I felt that there was so much of my time that I would be sitting and seeing kids, and it felt like I was in the middle of a river, just kind of grabbing one at a time, 2, 3 at a time, as there was a whole torrent of kids going by. So I've become an upstreamist, sometimes an extremist, but mainly an upstreamist. And so I spend a lot of my time now thinking about knowledge translation. And one of the things that I've come across in the past decade or so is the amazing learning in neuroscience about how the brain develops, how it changes with experience, and how relationships are absolutely the heart of the matter. So I was very excited when I was out in British Columbia at a conference, and I met Carrie and was introduced. You know, here I am speaking at a conference, and Carrie and some of those dudes out there in BC are a little forward. They said, "Well, while we've got you here, will you be part of a video?" So you're happy to see that I'm speaking a little faster than I spoke on that video. I was drugged or something. Oh no, delete that, we're live. So I'm so thrilled to have anything to do with this amazing organization and so interested in learning more about service learning, and with my brain geekiness trying to figure out, well, oh wow, what does that mean in terms of service learning and how the brain develops? So I'm going to speak to you about how the brain of adolescents develops. It is a wondrous thing to behold. As you look at this, you see an adolescent on a bike, on a bungee cord, about to go down. Now, does he know that this is a dangerous activity? Yes or no? He sure does. Does he care about the consequences? Well, maybe a little bit. But what does he care more about? The thrill. Absolutely. What we now know about the adolescent brain is that it's not a mini adult, it's not an adult in waiting, but there is absolutely a whole new field of development that is happening in that adolescent brain. We used to think that the brain develops early in life, in the early years, and that it was kind of set. Not much change happened. You know, kids would learn, but structurally and functionally, there wasn't as much change as happened in that early years. Well, then a bunch of scientists started scanning, doing MRIs on the same kids every year or so, and they went, holy cow. Well, I don't know if they went, holy cow, but you know, they were rather startled by the fact that the brains of the kids were changing as they were looking at the same kids over time. And they went, wow, we had better look more deeply into this. And that was part, in the past decade, that was part of the revolution of neuroscience that talked about, and now talks about, neuroplasticity. When I was in medical school, we thought of the brain kind of like a fixed unit. It was like a machine. We talked about it in those kind of terms. And then neuroscience started to see that, no, wow, the brain is much more malleable, much more changeable, and that it gets built by experience. By experience, by what kids do, and by relationships. So the news story in the past 10 years is it's not just all about the early years, which we love, which is built by serve and return. Parents are their kids' best toy. But it happens ongoing, not only in the middle years, but in adolescence. There is a ton of pruning of the brain cells, as well as resculpting of different areas. But here's the really, really good news. The good news is that neuroscience is showing us that the brain is capable of change throughout life. Throughout life. So if you're working with some grumpy old fart, you can say, I heard this psychiatrist last night, and she says you can change, but they have to want it, is the challenge. So here we've got a key message for you, and that is the brain changes with experience, and relationships is the nutrient of the brain. So you as teachers, we are working very, very hard, thinking about well-being and having relational health be part of what you think about in mental well-being. That how you relate to the kids in your school, in your classes, actually is literally sculpting their brain. Now, there's been this period of time called adolescence for a long time. We've got the old guys of Aristotle, who said that there was this period of time between childhood and adulthood where the kids were fickle in their desires, which were as transitory as they are vehement. And then we've got William Shakespeare talking about boiled brains and other things. So what we know biologically, there has been a change there's been a change in behavior observed for millennia. It's only been recently that we've seen that change of behavior has also changes in brain structures. But now you think about Romeo and Juliet. They were 14, 15, 17 years of age. Alexander the Great was only 15. You think about Marie Antoinette, she was only 15 or 16. And you go, well, our 15 and 16-year-olds are not leading empires. Why is it that our adolescents are still so young, still so immature? And what we recognize is there's a very big sociological impact on how we view adolescence and how we grow children into adulthood. And in fact, we have a new stage now called emerging adulthood. It is also known as they've finished their first degree and they're now back in the frickin' basement, right? So technically, it's a time of self-focused exploration. But the point to be made here is that adolescence is a sociological construct. That there are societies now, and there are societies that you young people are able to visit, say in Kenya, where they come into adulthood very, very early. But we in our society have created a period of time where there are many changes happening in the brain, and it is elongated. Now, do we know what's happening in the brains of those Kenyan young people? We don't. There aren't studies going on. But the hypothesis is that there's much more maturation happening, much more fast, more quickly, as they are taking on learning and responsibilities. So here's 3 points that the scientists now are making. That the brain is maturing. And as it matures, it becomes more specialized. So whatever kids are doing, they're busy doing is building and sculpting their brain. I'll show you what I mean by that. And they become more connected, they become more myelinated. But it doesn't all happen at once. Here's the kicker. It doesn't all happen uniformly. The limbic emotional system develops ahead of the executive director. Uh-oh. Now here is a glitch. So the emotional brain, I want it now, I need the thrill, is developing ahead of the, hang on a second, is this a good idea? So the executive director, the frontal lobes, are later to develop. They continue to develop until 25 years of age, sometimes later, particularly in males, and particularly in some males, none to be mentioned this evening. So the thing is, as Carrie's slide showed, we know that about 70 to 75% of mental health issues begin in adolescence. And so people think, well, why is this, with this increased neuroplasticity, changeability, there's increased vulnerability? So when there are moving parts and developing parts, is that why children and adolescents are more likely to start having mental health problems? But what do I mean about neurodevelopment and plasticity? So this is the basic brain cell called a neuron. It is comprised of an axon, that big long red, and a nucleus here. And what happens is signals get sent down that long arm of the axon. In adolescence, what we see happening is the covering of the axon is called myelin. And it means that the signal can go faster, and the signal doesn't take as long it doesn't have to take a big long rest in between sending another signal. So what does that mean? Well, it means when it comes to the emotional brain that you may have a very fast car with a very experienced driver at the wheel. That when the emotions are coming into play, we now know that adolescence is a time when it's harder to challenge that emotional response. It's moving along faster. So this is what a neuron does. It transmits neurotransmitters here. And I'm going to be talking in a few minutes about a particular neurotransmitter called dopamine, which is our reward neurotransmitter. So key messages so far is that the brain is under construction. It is not adulthood in miniaturized or in waiting. But what is happening in the brain, what you are learning, what your relationships are, what your experiences are, is literally sculpting that brain. So this is the seminal work of Dr. J. Geed. And what you see is blue is maturation. And you see that it starts at the back of the brain and ends up at the front. The last areas are the executive director. So the key concepts to be thinking about are, if in adolescence the brain is being pruned, so whatever the brain is busy doing is refining those connections, those neurons, those synapses, is being refined and pruned. The ones that get repeated and used over and over again, then along comes myelin, which is like an insulator. I was trying to think of that word earlier. It's an insulator. It's like copper wiring. It lets the signal go faster. So adolescence is a magnificent time for new learning. We, and many of us that I know, are on a campaign to get rid of the concept that adolescence is a time of stress and storm, and rather think about adolescence as a time of phenomenal opportunity. That as that brain is wiring, rewiring, pruning, and myelinating, we have to be creating the conditions where, man, oh man, they're going to have a great time, where they're going to have service learning, engage in wee days, engage in wee schools. If we understand the adolescent brain, we'll be doing what teachers have been saying for a very long time, and that's put education on its head. And say, why can't we create schools where kids are engaged and interested and excited in their learning and spend a whole lot of time developing their social relations, developing their social skills. We are literally wired to be socially connected. We know that if you don't have social connection, if you're isolated, then it wears away at your DNA. The telomeres, the little things that repair the DNA, they get worn down by loneliness. So many of us in my world are really concerned that kids are spending a lot of time with high connectivity on their iPhones and social media, but very little actual connectedness and depth. It's a worry because we are absolutely wired to do that connection. And as you guys, as teachers, know way better than any of us, even though I have 5 children, peer power has a huge impact. Huge impact. But why would kids be pulled towards their peers? Well, there's a wonderful book called Brainstorm by Dan Siegel. And what Dan talks about is, imagine if we had our cave girls and boys and they were just chilling and hanging out, and they just chilled and hung out and chilled and hung out, and they had at puberty and they just chilled and hung out. Well, we wouldn't have had any continuation of the human species. So in fact, what happens is there is a biological drive to get out and be with your peers. It's a biological drive. Now, I love to think I'm an attachment lover of the concept of attachment. What's really important, and this is true for me very much clinically, is kids have this drive to be with their peers so that they can create and recreate and don't even think about all the other stuff, but they still have an attachment to their parents. Just because they are attaching to their peers doesn't mean they have to close that off. There is still hugely important attachment to adults. But you know, the other big thing that's going on in the brain is the dopamine neurotransmitter. You know, when the synapses talk to each other, they send neurotransmitters. The synapses that are really majorly affecting adolescent behavior are the dopamine ones. They are our reward stimuli neurons. And the dopamine, kids want novel experiences. They want exciting, low-effort experiences. Hello, calculus, right? Are we creating environments in school that are going to help? So, as I've said, the limbic system, the emotional system is developing ahead of the stop, plan, and think executive director prefrontal cortex. So, very interesting research was done by Dr. Debbie Yergel and Todd. She showed kids this face. Now, when we look at this, what do we see? What emotion do we see? Fear. So, on average, adults look at this and they see fear. Kids look at this and they say, she looks angry. She looks ticked off. So she did a series of experiments showing them all these different faces. And the kids saw more anger or hot emotion than cool emotion. So she was going, what does this mean? So she put the kids in the scanner, and what she saw was that kids were reading emotion through their limbic emotional brain. Adults were looking at it through their thinking brain. So in order for us to develop the ability to read the emotions of others, we first have to feel the emotion and then develop the ability to label it. Making sense? What does it mean? It means that they're likely to misinterpret facial expressions of emotion. Why are you yelling, Mum? Are you kidding? I haven't even started yet, right? I remember Vice Principal in Guelph saying to me, you know, that's so odd. I was just walking down the hall this afternoon and a girl came up to me and said, sir, you look so upset. What's wrong? He was just thinking. So they're reading more emotion in our faces than we think that we are communicating. When I teach judges this, I tell them that it doesn't mean that they have to kind of go Botox, you know, but they have to be aware that kids are hyper-aware and hyper-attentive to what's going on in your face. It's why whenever I get a chance to talk to educators, I say sarcasm doesn't have a place with the adolescent brain, because they may think they get it, but there's a part of their brain, the amygdala, that wonders about it. So they're processing and they may react quickly. So the last areas to develop, those of you who have adolescents at home, is the frontal lobe, the organizing, planning, thinking it through, problem solving, impulse inhibition. Does this sound like a bug list of any parent of an adolescent? So what helped me with my 5 kids was recognizing they're not doing it on purpose. They will learn. They're under construction. As I was driving to do a talk at the YMCA on the adolescent brain, I'm coming from Hamilton into Toronto, and stop and go traffic. Back in the olden days when there was some go traffic, but stop and go, and I look in my rear view mirror, and there's a kid in the car behind me, and he comes and he smacks right into me. So I come out of the car, and what's the very first thing that goes through my mind? We're not going to say the very first thing that came through my mind, but the second thing was under construction. His brain had not yet wired up in all of the places, one, to know which foot to put down, which brake to go on, but the other was the emotional overwhelm. The first thing he said was, "My mother's going to kill me," right? Wrong. Your mother's going to be so glad that you didn't get killed. So here it is. Who was that comedian that used to say, "The devil made me do it"? This is what is going on in the adolescent brain. The limbic system is saying, "Do it now." And the prefrontal cortex is saying, "Think about it." So if you got that picture of the emotional brain, but the amazing thing is that's when the emotions are called into play. The rest of the time, the adolescent brain is absolutely capable of calculation, thinking through. In fact, if you want a problem solved creatively, get yourself a group of adolescents. So this is the work of a guy I love. I suggest you Google him when you leave here, Dan Siegel, who's written a book called Brainstorm. So I've given you the science that's going on behind. He tells us a wonderful thing called essence. He loves acronyms. So he says adolescence is all about emotional spark. And it has a positive side, great passion you bring to your work. You think about Craig Heilberg and at 12 and 13 years of age, how he changed the world, that passion to have that. But also, that emotional spark, those changes in the limbic system also lead to emotional storms. Adolescence is all about social engagement, about the desire to have peer relationships. But the downside of it is it can make you go along with the crowd and take risks. N is for novelty. Dopamine experiences more pleasure. Here's the sad thing for us as adults. We will never get again the thrill, the dopamine thrill that you get in adolescence. Why? Because the Creator has made it that you have a lower baseline level and a bigger kick when you get it. The problem, though, is that dopamine makes you more prone to addiction, makes you more prone to those damn video games that give you those dopamine bursts all the time. And then CE is for creative exploration. So that is how kids, the greatest inventions, have often been made by young people. Because they're not limited by, "Oh, well, that's not possible to do." They say, "Well, screw that. I'm going to come up with an idea and follow it through." So they're pushing away from the status quo and they are seeking the thrill of discovery. So a couple of things that we can talk more about on the in the question and answer is sleep. We know now that adolescents need more sleep. They need 9 3/4 hours of sleep, but they don't feel the need to go to sleep until 11 or 12 o'clock at night, right? So sleep is an issue. We have many kids who are sleep deprived. Also, none of these pictures are from my house, just so you know that. Not even this one with the little picture of the paragraph down there. But here we've got a time when kids have got more exposure to much more risky stuff. We know now, and we can, if there's questions about this, we know now that alcohol has a different impact on the adolescent brain than it has on the adult brain. Have you ever wondered, you've read stories of kids being alcohol poisoned, and you wonder, how can you drink so much that you actually get poisoned? Well, it's because the adolescent brain is under construction, and the alcohol doesn't sedate in the same way that it does adult brains. It doesn't sedate, but what it does do is it socially disinhibits earlier. So great, here we've got sleep-deprived, non-sedated, socially disinhibited, out every night. So as Jay Geed says, this is the greatest time. It's reconfigured, it's much more susceptible. So we have to be thinking then, what can we do about this? What can we do to maximize an understanding of what the adolescent brain is and how we can bring what we know into what we do? So I have a very good friend called Stephen de Groot, and he says that what we need to be thinking about in teaching, in social services, in many, many places, is, are we creating, with our knowledge, are we creating the environments where kids are feeling safe? Are we creating the environments where kids are feeling significant, where they feel that they're valued and they're valuable? There's a difference between feeling loved and being lovable. There's a difference between being told you're valuable and actually feeling that value. Are we creating our classrooms so that that's what kids are experiencing? And then, are they situated? Do they feel that they've got a sense of agency, a sense of power, a sense of connection? So I want to stop with this and say, as we learn more about the adolescent brain, and as we think about the we and service learning, are we creating in our environment situations that we are feeding kids what it is they need to grow well? If the brain is built by relationships and experience, there's a Cree legend that says that the grandfather is teaching, and he says, life is really hard. We've got good in us and bad in us. But we have to really be thinking all of the time. It's almost as if we've got two wolves. One is nasty and ugly and angry. The other is kind and generous and joyous. And one of the little ones up front says, "Grandfather, tell me, which wolf wins?" He says, "It depends which one you feed." So I'm on a mission, and I hope you join me on this mission, to have a reframe of how we see adolescence, that the essence of adolescence is amazing ability, creativity, and a huge, huge debt that we have to their wisdom. And that through things like we and service learning, the adolescent brain is going to become absolutely full and come to full fruition. So I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much for your attention. It's been amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was my second time hearing Dr. Jean Clinton, and every time she makes me laugh, and every time I learn so much. So thank you so much. We love your Scottish humor. It was very well taken. So. Yes. So it's question and answer time. I have a bunch of questions here in my hand that have either come through social media this evening, or if the audience has already written some questions. But I love the ending, and I have to, just because I'm the believer, obviously, overseeing the service learning program here at We Schools, is I want you to the question, and you ended that so well, but why service learning is so important, and as a teacher, why would you do it when you're thinking of this brain being under construction?
Yeah, so I think for me, the service learning if you think about what makes learning exciting, what helps kids really engage, is when they feel that they've got a real stake in it. Mm-hmm. When they're engaged, they're interested, they may even have come up with their own idea. That changes different pathways and activations in the brain, rather than sitting, being stuffed. I describe a lot of education as stuffing the duck. What we know as adults we're stuffing into them, rather than thinking about education as lighting the flame. So service learning allows kids to light the flame, to become engaged, to focus their attention, which releases dopamine, which increases the ability to make more and more connections. So service learning and brain development, hand in glove. In terms of well-being, service learning, doing good to and with others, feeling that you yourself are safe, situated, significant, which service learning does, absolutely grows those connections in the same way.
Wonderful, lighting the flame. We will all remember that as educators.
I'll have to remember who first said it. It was somebody like Aristotle. So,
excellent.
Wish it was me.
Okay, so first question here from someone in the audience. What are examples of meaningful ways to promote positive brain development in and outside of the classroom? I think you did just answer one of them by service learning, but can you give us a couple other examples?
Yeah, so if we can cue up my slides again, I was thinking about the slide 44 there.
The next one.
The next one, yeah. So here we are. What we can do, and this is from my good friend Dr. Kathy Short and School Mental Health Assist, now Ontario.
Our good friend too.
And good friend of we. So what are some of the practices that you can do every day in school to be building that? So if we think of a relational lens, then we can think about welcoming, so creating supportive environments in the classroom. That means knowing the kids' names. That means smiling at them, including them, so figuring out and finding out what they're interested in. I have one of my kids didn't like school very much, and I can tell you exactly who his favorite teachers were, because they were ones who said, "What do you love? What do you love?" And my son would talk to them about Pink Floyd and other things. Promote social and emotional learning. Know your students and build mental health literacy, and partner with them to create connections with home and community. So it looks like meaningful relationships, knowing your students, genuine connection. I think we can't emphasize that enough. There are many teachers who feel that they're connected to their students, but you ask the students and the students don't feel that they're connected. That they say that the teacher's interested in my marks, but they're not that interested in me, which horrifies the teachers. So we need to look at doing it a bit differently. And again, these slides, now that they're up, they're there.
And that question was not staged. I love how prepared you came, Dr. Jean. That's amazing. Okay, so if you're in the audience and you have a question based off of something she said tonight, please let us know. And if you're watching online, please just text or message your question in. So here we go. I realize there is not a simple fix for the spiraling rate of anxiety issues, but what do you recommend as something teachers can do in class to help day-to-day basics for those students that are suffering from anxiety?
So I think it's a great question. So what the science is telling us in a recent Ontario Child Health Survey, that the number of kids with anxiety disorders has not increased that much since 1984. The number of kids who have a perception that anxiety is overwhelming to them but not have disorder has tripled. Right? So the perception of anxiety, that kids are experiencing it, but they don't meet the diagnostic criteria, has tripled. So that one of the things that tells us is that we're never going to have enough mental health professionals to deal with it. What we know is that kids are having less and less deep relationships and more superficial relationships. So what we need to be focusing on is the development of social and emotional learning. that we need to be deeply thinking about how do we help kids develop the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes in the everyday activities that they can deal with it. What can a teacher do? This is it. Be present. Work with other teachers. You know, we have kids in high school who are stressed up the max because every teacher is giving them 3 hours of homework a night to do. Well, we need to be thinking more collectively and thinking what is reasonable. We have to have teachers thinking together as a team about what are the overall objectives for that. The other big part of it is parents. We have to support parents in putting away the damn cell phone as well, and putting some limits. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a fabulous resource that is a family media use guide, where you can plot out what the kids are involved in the day, you negotiate with them how much they're going to be on things, but the parents also have to buy into it as well.
Excellent. I think very well answered. Can you speak of the importance of understanding the brain early on as an educator? So how early as an educator, understanding it? So I think we're talking about probably primary, junior.
So two sides to that question, as I'm hearing you, Carrie. One is there's a certain doctor in the audience who has created a magnificent program called Mind Up, which is sponsored by the Goldie Hawn Foundation, and kids, it's about mindfulness and education, and the kids are learning in kindergarten about how their brain develops. When I visited a kindergarten class in near where I live in Hamilton, the kids were telling me all about the amygdala, and they were telling me all about the synapses that they were forming. And one little girl I sat beside, and I said, "Tell me about a calming moment." And she said, "Well, it's just I make my brain just be very restful." I said, "Do you like that?" "Yes, I do." "Does your brain ever feel not so restful, not so calm?" "Yes." "Do you want to tell me about that?" "No." She's learned her boundaries pretty early. So how early can you learn about the brain? These kids are doing a magnificent job of it. How early in your career as a teacher should you learn about the brain is the other part I hear of that question. And it should be incorporated into pre-service teaching education. And we should be really thinking about how do we educate teachers who are in the field as well. It needs to be so integrated in. It's not the answer to everything, but boy, oh boy, it's a framework that can help you think things through.
Excellent. I'm going to, because I'm hogging with the questions here. Does anyone in the audience have a question tonight? Or Kayla, has any come through online? And if you can just let us know your name and where you're from, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm not a teacher, so I'm just from Toronto. My question for you is, how do you see, or do you see playing a role in kids' well-being and how they develop in the school, outside the school in general?
Oh my God, do I love that question.
I love you,
Anna.
so it's great.
Thank you. So, you know, the reality is that kids absolutely learn through play, and not just kids. Well, you know, because we think of play in a certain kind of a way, but we as adults learn through playful exploration as well. But what we know is play is absolutely essential to kids learning. That they learn how to socialize, they learn how to get along. They learn different roles. You know, when I'm getting dressed in the morning, I put on my underwear unless I'm being Batman, and I put the underwear on that. You know, there's so many important things that are developed. In fact, the Council of Ministers of Education of Canada have made a statement on the importance of play, that we need to be incorporating it in. That we need to be thinking about, and in the States, a survey that was done, 30% of kindergarten classes no longer have recess because they're too busy stuffing the duck. You know, thinking literacy and numeracy is what counts above all. And we know that social and emotional learning and how kids learn through play is a much better predictor of long-term outcome than even your IQ at that age. So play is massively important. I'm on a mission. One of my other missions is to ban the practice of taking away recess. Right?
Great mission.
Great mission.
Yes, I think we can all agree with that.
Yeah.
Don't we agree? Yes? Yes, okay, that's great. Because I've seen you speak now, this is my second time. One thing you said that I keep going back to is our genes are always listening.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit
Sure.
on that? Because I keep going back and wanting to quote you, Dr. Jean. I just haven't been able to. So the more I hear it, and I think it applies to us as teachers.
Yeah, so absolutely. So the next kind of layer down of understanding the brain development is the fact that, so if you go into the architecture of the brain, what is actually happening? Why is it that talk to your kids changes their brain connections in terms of language development and hearing? Well, what it is, what we know now, is that the DNA, so, you know, the chromosomes that we get from our mum and our dad, the DNA actually is listening to the environment. So if you talk lots to your little one, the DNA that's involved in hearing and speaking gets turned on. So it's listening, it turns on. But if you're in an environment where you don't have very much language, where people aren't talking to you, that DNA doesn't get turned on, or it gets silenced. So the genes are always listening to the environment. So we used to think the genes determined who you were. And then there was a big nature and nurture. My first degree is music. So we would go to the pub and we'd argue, is it nature, is it nurture? You know, is it genes or the environment? Which one's more important? So, you know, I joke and say it was a good time, but it was a waste of time. Because what we now know is that the genes are interacting with the environment in ways that we had no clue of before. So what you're doing as teachers is quite literally changing the expression of the DNA. So if you're a teacher who is warm and nurturing, you think about some of the teachers who you had who led you into teaching, they changed your DNA. But you know, here's the kicker. The teachers who were real jerks to you and made you decide that you were going to go into teaching so nobody treated anybody like that again, that changed your DNA too. Babies and kids' brains don't say, oh no, this is a bad experience, I don't want this, my DNA rejects thee, get lost. They don't. It gets built by the experience that's there.
Thank you. And I think that to me is so profound, because if you think about the amount of time an educator has with our students every single day and every action, and I love that you said greet your students by name. Such a simple action, but it goes so far. And so some of the when you're talking about promoting mental health or well-being within the classroom is really just the simple things that anyone can really do, because the way you were describing, like the genes are always listening. So we can't control sometimes when the kids go home, but we can control what's in our classroom. We can educate our parents and get them on board. And that's why that's the one thing that when I go out and talk to teachers in professional learning, I do bring up a lot, because I think it's so impactful of the role of a teacher. And we're in a room full of teachers. We know many teachers are watching, so thank you for sharing. Any other question? Oh, an online question. Two from online. Oh, yay. But do you...
So, you know, I think that what we always need to be mindful of is how the teacher's DNA is also being altered by the pressures and the stress that they're under as well. That the teacher may say, yeah, well-being is really important, but I have to cover the frickin' curriculum. Mm-hmm. You know, if I don't cover this, you know, the pressure that they're experiencing. So I think the mindfulness that I mentioned in Mind Up, teachers paying attention to their own well-being is absolutely hugely important as well.
Excellent. Okay, so this just in from Chicago, Illinois, United States. How can you find ways to foster meaningful social connections when you are dependent on technology?
Put the technology away is the easiest answer. But it is very challenging. The technology itself is not the problem. Technology itself is not the problem. And this is true when we look at the early years and we look at middle years. The problem is what the technology is stealing you from. And I think that's the way we need to think about it, is stealing you from the social engagement of being with others, that biology that we have to be connected. So I think it's very challenging to try and there is such a thing as internet addiction. There is such a thing as technology addiction. And so I think people have to recognize what you're allowing to happen, both yourself as a youth and the adults around.
Excellent. And just because I will do a plug for We Schools, we actually have a program that we're calling Technology for Social Good. And so it's how to embrace technology in good ways within the classroom and within schools. Because
that's the way it should be.
Because you can't push it away.
No.
So how do we embrace it in the right ways? Yeah. So if you want more about that, just let us know. Audience question over there with Jeff.
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm a principal in York Region District School Board. My question is about those students who are underperforming, underachieving, or who have experienced great trauma. Any tips besides what you've shared today in how we teach, how we nurture, how we build relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Greg. So I think when we're thinking about trauma, we need to be thinking about asking the question, and I know you'll know this, not so much as what's wrong with you as what's happened to you. So kids who have experienced trauma, their brains are activated, their limbic system, so what I've described in the adolescent brain, magnify many, many, many times over. So trauma puts the brain on high alert, looking for danger. It makes sense biologically to do that. What does that mean? It means that those students need much, much more of your relationship. They need you to be connecting with them, to be reaching out to them, to say, I accept you. You find out what they love. Students who are more challenging to engage is the key. I visited a school north of Toronto, and the principal said, you know, we had this bunch of kids who were out smoking marijuana on the hill, and they wouldn't come in. Well, I want to bring them all in. So they were the classically disengaged. They probably had learning difficulties. They may have been involved in child welfare. They had things that were stacked against them. But he was a pretty cool guy. And he said, well, I want them in here. So what did he do? Oh, I wish I could remember the 4 steps of we, because I think they did it. So out he went. He sent a lovely teacher out to talk to them and said, how can we get you back into the school?
Investigate and learn.
Yes.
Learning from the students.
There we go. Off they went, investigate and learn. And they said, well, you know, if we kind of had a hip-hop club, we might be interested in coming in. So they engaged their interests. They went out to do that. The kids came in, they invited the other kids in. Those kids stayed in school and actually have been coming back for a decade to lead that. Other kids in the school, though, said, well, these clubs are a pretty cool idea. We'd like to have a club. Well, the principal said there are 3 conditions. It has to go along with school policy. It has to be safe, and I can't remember the third one. They said, oh, okay, sir, well, we would like to have a legalized marijuana club. Said, oh, sorry, it's not going to work. They went away 2 days later, came back and said, sir, we have another idea. We want a debating society club. Fantastic idea. Sir, the first thing we'd like to debate? Legalizing marijuana. So my point is that when we see the good in kids, when we see what they're capable of, rather than thinking about what they can't do, when we think very long and hard, how do we engage? What are we doing with our own bias? What are we doing with our own privilege? And we deeply look at that. Then we reach out and say, show me, teach me, rather than you don't know, you can't learn. Thanks, Greg.
And I love what you said earlier about emotions, right? So instead of reacting, taking a pause, understanding that the brain is under construction, and then watch your reaction. I thought
Yeah.
that was quite significant earlier today. So let's take this last question from Western Canada. Can you talk more about neuroplasticity, and how it can be taught to children?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I would recommend Mind Up, buying the books, they're easy. So neuroplasticity is how the brain gets changed by by the experiences. So the brain is not hard and firm and fixed, but as you hear my Scottish accent, that's because of neuroplasticity. I cannot talk without this accent. That's neuroplasticity as well, because the ability to do that was snipped away. So we have to maximize it. The good news is we can keep on learning throughout our life. The bad news is the early years of childhood are the time when we're building the framework, where we're building the ecology, the architecture of the brain. So we have to get the early years right.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to end soon, but do you have any, we're in a room full of teachers. We have thousands of teachers watching online. You have been so profound for us all, but what would you want to leave us with this evening?
I'd want to leave you with love builds brains, that you be your true, authentic self with the students in your classroom. You are human developers. You're way more. You're way more to those kids. You spend more time with them. So bring your love, bring your authentic self, and be the best you can be. That was what I would leave with.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
So, on behalf of all of and on behalf of all our educators that we work with, on behalf of everyone in this room, on behalf of everyone that watched globally today, we are so thrilled to have you, and thank you so much for spending your evening with us, Dr. Jean Clinton.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.